Listen to Times Radio on your smart speaker. Just say, play Times Radio.
Early Breakfast with Rosie Wright on Times Radio.
Well, having been quite publicly rebuked yesterday by the Chancellor and the Prime Minister, Richard Hughes' resignation as head of the OBR makes the front pages of many of the papers. The Times plays it pretty straight. The OBR boss quits after the Prime Minister's budget leak rebuke. The Guardian says the OBR chair quits after the inquiry into the early release of the budget document. That's the report that said this was the worst error in the OBR's history. The Daily Mail says the fall guy for Regis' budget lies, and the Daily Telegraph says Reeves clings on as the OBR chief is silenced. Well, let's go through some of the other stories inside the paper today with the Barrister broadcaster, president of Octopus TV, Andrew Eborn. Andrew, good morning.
Good morning, Rosie. Always a delight to join you.
The story I want to talk to you about with your sort of legal head-on is the announcement that we're going to hear a little bit later today. David Lammy, the Justice Secretary, will be on Times Radio just after 7 o'clock. He says, I don't want to scrap juries. This is about saving them. His proposals are that for many crimes where previously you would have had the option to say, actually, I'd like a panel of my peers to hear my case, that right gets lost for crimes like burglary, drug dealing, and instead you will have a single individual that hears your case. Are you nervous about these changes, or do you think it's the right call?
Well, firstly, I understand the problem because there's a massive backlog in getting justice heard, and they often say that the punishment is the process. These things are taking an absolute eternity. People are always talking about Article 39 of Magna Carta, which establishes the sense of importance of a fair trial and the role of your peers, your equals, the jury. What Lammy's looking at is Article 40, which basically says that you have to make sure that justice is not delayed. So what he's doing now, he's sort of fudging it. He's talking about what are called either way offences. And these are sort of offences which might be sometimes tried in the lower courts, the magistrates' court, depending on the severity, or they can be heard in the Crown Court if it's more serious. So looking at things like theft or shoplifting, it might depend on the value stolen, assault occasioning actual bodily harm, possession of drugs with intent to supply, burglary and handling stolen goods. Those sort of categories could well fall within these either way trials. But it is a fundamental right, and it has been since Magna Carta, to be tried by your peers. So the initial headline grabbing about scrapping juries was obviously going to get this tremendous backlog, particularly from lawyers. It'd be interesting to see the details, because if a case could be heard in the lower court and it will speed it up, then that means that you're taking away that sort of option. So does that also mean that the potential punishments, which are obviously higher in the higher courts, does that mean they're going to be reduced as well? So let's see what happens. But justice not only should be done, but needs to be seen to be done. And we need to make sure that those fundamental rights are not eroded.
But the delay is so costly now. I mean, it is if you are a victim waiting for your case to be heard. And we know that in some cases, the integrity of the evidence is reduced, the length of time that you have to before you stand up before court and give it. But the other thing, imagine waiting to have your case heard. If you are determined that you are innocent and you have that hanging over you. I mean, it is appalling that backlog has been allowed, really, in some senses, Andrew, to get as long as it has, nearly 80,000 people.
No, you're absolutely right. And this is a justice system which is on its knees. We're letting people out early because we just don't have space in prisons and so on and so forth. And that is wrong. The justice system needs to work in an appropriate way. My pet subject about AI is being used in lots of cases to speed up the legal process around the world. So we're going to see that being introduced. But basically, eroding fundamental human rights is the wrong way to go about it. We should be looking at more efficiencies and working on that premise.
OK. Front page of the Times, there's an interesting gear change in our relationship with the United States. The headline here is Boost for Patients as Britain and the US agree a zero tariff drug deal. What are the details of the deal?
Well, this is great, actually. It's great for patients because basically new drugs which have been present to be judged to be unaffordable by the NHS will now be included as part of this deal. But it's also going to see the cost that the UK spends on some medicine rising by 25%. The actual cost is expected to push up the NHS drugs bill by $3 billion a year. But what happens at the moment, just so people know, is that at present the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, and NICE as they're affectionately called, tracks the cost of a treatment for every healthy year it delivers for a patient. So there is a cost for a life. and that used to be between £20,000 and £30,000 for every year of life. Under these new rules, it's going to be increased to £25,000 to £35,000, between that sort of boundaries. And as a result, drugs which previously were deemed to be more or too expensive will now be allowed. So it's great news for some people who've been looking at drugs over the pond and saying, if only we could have that over here. Well, now you should be able to. What's also the good news is that Trump has said that he will be able to keep 0% tariff rates on drugs coming from the UK for the next 3 years. So as a result of the deal, basically the net spending on medicine is forecast to rise by about 9.5% of the budget to 12% over the next decade. But the benefits for patients, for all of us, it will be seen.
Yeah, so there is a price tag for all of this, of course, but in essence, patients will be able to gain access to drugs that are present sort of judged to be unaffordable by the NHS. So the deal means we can afford to buy those, but obviously that means the spending on drugs overall goes up. We'll have a little bit more detail on this in the business news a little bit later. Andrew, we heard in the politics that junior doctors are going to go on strike again. It's been dubbed a cynical attempt to wreck Christmas. Why so? They have a right to strike. They'd like better pay. They'd like better conditions. So they are completely entitled to walk off the job.
Well, basically, it's going to be their third this year in a dispute with the government over the number of available jobs and training opportunities, as well as their pay. The reason about these strikes and when you time them is, of course, to cause as much damage as possible, because that's how you get people to sit up and listen. So the fundamental points there, yes, it is going to drag on and on and on. And both earlier strikes this year in July and November, the NHS in England kept more than 95% of planned hospital visits going, despite the numbers walking out. So Christmas is a terrible time to want to go to hospital. Not that anybody wants to go to hospital, but if you have to, because of emergencies or otherwise, that sort of impact is going to be quite tremendous. But obviously it's deliberately pieced on that sort of basis to make people sit up and listen.
Yeah, well, the strike action will finish at 7 o'clock in the morning on the 22nd of December. Clearly, hospitals are going to be stretched and busy at that point. And now, so I think one of the challenges for the BMA, Andrew, is that the NHS providers have got quite used to having to manage without the resident doctors when they go on strike, and therefore the impact of the strike has been somewhat reduced over the last, 2.5 years.
Oh, no, absolutely. And as you were brilliantly pointing out earlier in your wonderful programme, people are getting a bit tired of all these strikes and the sympathy is diminishing. So what's going to happen? And it does accelerate the use of alternatives. And again, with robotics and the advances there and so on and so forth, and AI introducing all sorts of efficiencies, it's forcing people to look at those alternatives, as well as you say, going through agencies to get those staff.
Now, do we have sympathy for the campaign? This is the 4-Day Week Foundation, who've been writing to the Education Secretary saying that schools in England and Wales should pilot a 4-day working week because the shorter timetables could help tackle worsening teacher burnout. If I was a parent, I'd be pretty unhappy if I then had to, organise childcare for a whole nother day of the week. Do you think it's a good idea?
I understand about the burnout, but you're absolutely right about childcare. With people hearing that, you can hear good news about what's happening with drugs being made available and so on and so forth. But the reality now, if you get your teachers only doing 4-day, it's not going to work. The question is, does that mean you're going to get the extra teachers? Because this is what they're saying. The government is struggling to meet its manifesto pledge, like most of them, to recruit 6,500 teachers without bolder leadership on working patterns. So if you make your teachers work a bit less, you might be able to introduce some new ones. So whether they're talking about the schools only doing 4-day weeks or whether the particular teachers are doing 4-day weeks, that needs to be looked at. But I'm with you on that one, Rosie. The parents will not be happy if they have to organise other sort of health, other care for their children for the day that is missed, if that is indeed what's being suggested.
Yeah, and bad news for the campaign, because responding to the petition, the government said it had no plans to reduce the school week to 4 days. So that is about actually the school week, rather than just the number of days that the teachers working in your school are actually there in person. Yeah. There we go. We talk so much about screen time, children, Andrew, but there has been real alarm raised inside the Times today, this report. There'll be a little bit more about this on Times Radio Breakfast, actually, as children as young as 3 using social media. I mean, this is not those individuals' fault, is it? Something's gone wrong with parenting, and to say, oh, do you know what? I just need a bit of peace. I'm going to give you my phone, my iPad, whatever it is. But, no one would imagine that they would want to see their 3-year-old scrolling.
No, you're absolutely right. And it is alarming, the statistics. More than 800,000 children aged 3 to 5 years old are using social media. And it's social media, not just the internet playing your Peppa Pig games and other bits and pieces. So it's social media. And this is an analysis of data from Ofcom by the Centre for Justice, Social Justice think tank, the CSJ. They found that 37% of parents of 3 to 5-year-olds said their child was using at least one social media platform, up from 29% in 2023. A very worrying statistic. And as Lord Nash, the former education minister, said, the report was deeply alarming. He added that children who haven't yet learnt to read are being fed content and algorithms designed to hook adults, and they should concern us all. So this is very different to technology. And as I say, using, there's lots of educational games which are great for that particular age group. Social media itself is not good. And it is interesting, the timing of this, as you be aware, the world's first law is due to come into effect in Australia next week. From December the 10th, social media platforms will have to take reasonable steps to prevent under-16s in the country from having a social media account. Also, the Princess of Wales, the Princess Catherine, she's campaigning about the sort of digitally detoxing the children. Prince William has spoken about not letting his children have smartphones, although George will get a dumb phone, as he calls it, when he goes to school, just for safety reasons. But that's what you want. People are embedding themselves in technology far too early, and as a result, society's suffering. People don't know how to communicate face to face. You see people embedded digitally all the time throughout their life, and that needs to change. Getting them at an early age at 3 is not good.
Yeah, well, then those algorithms are so addictive. Andrew, thank you very much. Andrew Ebon, the Barrister, broadcaster, president of Octopus TV. And actually, if you're feeling fury at sort of the amount of time you spend online or the content you're seeing on it, I know we sort of slightly sigh when we hear there's another word of the year, but the Times leading article today inside the paper, and they've got a sort of a news story on this as well, Oxford University's word of the year is rage bait, and that is posts that are crafted deliberately to make you angry. So whether you're on X or Facebook and you see content that gets under your skin, and it does so effectively, that's been dubbed the word of the year. I think it's a sort of a universally felt feeling of extreme frustration when you go on your phone in this morning, you get the sense of doom because someone is trying to wind you up, and normally it works fairly effectively. So you can read more of that inside the Times today.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.